Are we live? There we go.
There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the Patreon Hangout discussion for Helpless and the
Hello,
Zeppo.
everyone.
And you want to make sure either you, like me, there we go. There's a little lag.
That runs.
I can tell we're all a little wound up, so this is going to be fun.
I'm not drinking coffee. What are you talking about?
I had to stop drinking coffee because it was a little...
I didn't just watch the last episode. What are you talking about?
Well, Jack and I were watching it right before we started this. So.
We actually had to finish the Zeppo 5 minutes early because we needed time to get ready.
As usual, I am planning and on time and ahead of things.
We are known for our organizational skills. It's what we excel at.
So let me just do that again. We got a little clipped off. Hello, everyone in chat, and hello and welcome to everyone in the Hangout. If you are a Patreon member, there's a link to join the Hangout over on Patreon right now. We do this once a month. I have grown to really enjoy them. We are today talking about Helpless and the Zeppo. One of those things is not like the other. So, and then
in what context?
The way we tend to do this is we're gonna watch the episode guide for both of those, or rather one at a time. We'll have a little discussion, and I try and get us out of here at a decent 2 hours. Although last time we went to 3 because of
no, we went to 2.5. We didn't
2.5, yeah.
All the way to 3.
We could have gone to 3.
Now my preference here is going to be to spend just someone is not. I'm getting an echo. Someone needs to mute the stream itself. But my preference here will be to spend a little more time on Helpless because I think there's a.
Do I have to mute the microphone?
No, Boris, you just want to turn the volume down on the YouTube stream because I'm getting I'm hearing myself coming back.
I don't have the YouTube stream up now, but
yeah, the echo's gone, so we're good.
Coffee's ruined me. You said stream itself, but I'm like there itself. Never mind.
I'm trying to figure. There we go. All right, so I try and keep an eye on chats and pass the mic and have us all be involved. There's good stuff, and I always get a lot out of these discussions. So let us begin. If everyone could mute yourself, we're going to start with the episode guide for Helpless, which I have not watched since this was released. So now I finagle like a 99-year-old man. No offense to 99-year-old men who might be subscribed. Here we go. Screen share. Screen 2. Oh, and I need to get my sound. 1 sec. There we go. I have switched displays. So this should actually look a little better in the stream, hopefully.
Ooh.
I had a super wide before, and now I'm just doing dual displays. Okay, mute yourself. Here we go. Nope. Unsurprising that I screwed it up. Here we go. Send as default device. Once more with feeling. The series, there are 2 things that are going to begin to happen more often. The first is we will stumble deeper and deeper into areas which I have very little firsthand experience with. We already regularly bump into the limits of my knowledge. Consequently, I do a lot of reading for each script, and I've mentioned on numerous occasions my primary source, Mark Field's book, Myth, Metaphor, and Morality, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Go and buy it on Amazon. It's a friggin' dolly. The Kindle app is on everything. But the second thing that's going to happen is we're going to land on more contentious and incendiary topics. Topics that are precious to people, that have even had thunderous and agonizing consequences in their own lives. Topics that are still the center of teeth-gnashing shouting matches between individuals today. Let's take an example from Helpless. The word patriarchy can have considerable impact depending on the form of it you use. There's patriarch, which means the male head of a family, a definition that to me doesn't preclude the possibility of there being a female head of the family. There's patriarchal, a general term that can be applied to an organization or system. And then there's the more loathsome term, the patriarchy, which, judging by the subjective flogging the internet has given it, could refer to our U.S. society, which is no longer legally patriarchal, but reforms take a long time to permeate the cultural zeitgeist, or it could refer to a shadowy stonecutter cabal of men. Is there a shadowy cabal of men in this world whose intense machinations are meant to stall and handicap the status of women in modern times? I don't know. If there is, I haven't been invited into it, which is fine by me. I don't much like going to meetings, but that's my point. I don't know. I don't know, and the channel must continue forward anyway, which is why I've always considered the channel a conversation between you and me. I have no interest in debates. The objective of a debate is to win. The objective of a conversation is to understand. So let's continue to be kind and civil to each other. I expect things to become contentious between us, and I welcome that, because the things we care about the deepest are the most worth talking about. And if something I believe is wrong, I'd want to find that out. Wouldn't you? Angel and Buffy are having a sparring session, perhaps a substitute for working out other impulses they have to stay away from. Buffy wins the match and threatens death by baguette, which made me, for the first time, consider the phallic nature of staking.
Satisfied? I'm not sure that's the word.
Angel seems chipper for the first time in a few episodes. The way he asked Buffy what she's up to this weekend sounded like a teenage boy talking to his first crush.
Am I going to see you this weekend?
Again, she is his only tie to the world, but the fact that she's willing to spend time with him is clearly bringing him back from the brink. Giles is spending time with Buffy, training her on distinguishing between vibrational stones. During their conversation, Buffy drops an important MacGuffin for the plot, which is that Faith has gone on a walkabout and can't be out patrolling. None of the rest of the episode would be possible without that little detail. Out on patrol later, Buffy feels a wave of nausea, and her considerable power suddenly dissipates. She barely escapes with her life, and Giles tells her to take a few days off for herself. It's birthday time. Buffy's 18, and Buffy's dad welches on their annual ice capade tradition. At a dilapidated bed and breakfast in town, some men are performing curious renovations on the structure. Their most senior member comments that whatever they're doing is something to do with Buffy. At school the next day, Buffy is trying to convince Giles to go to the ice capades with her in her dad's place.
It's usually something that families do together.
A touching and incredibly telling indication of his status in her life. Giles pulls out the large blue crystal again, which he refers to as a grounding crystal, and asks Buffy to look at its inner flaw. She becomes hypnotized, and Giles uses the opportunity to drug her with some kind of magical injection. The next day on campus, a roided-out high school boy who looks to be about in his late 20s gets physical with Cordelia. Buffy tries to intervene and is tossed by him easily. She runs to Giles again for help.
I throw knives like...
Go. He says not to worry, it will sort itself out. Again, Anthony Stewart Head gives a nuanced little performance here, not overplaying Giles' guilt or his inability to make eye contact. We know what's going on because we've seen him act nefariously, but he gives a convincing enough performance for Buffy that we can believe she might feel reassured by it. In the next scene at the bed and breakfast, Giles' complicitness in whatever is going on comes to light. The whole rite they're engaged in is spoken of vaguely, but it's clear that whatever is going to happen, Buffy will succeed or die. Giles tries to argue that the practice they've engaged in is barbaric, but is rebuked for being too close to the Slayer. The monster in the box is revealed to be a raging vampire named Kralik, who is addicted to pills of some sort.
Pills, 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 pills.
The gang is doing research into the nature of Buffy's illness. Oz and Xander again get some of my favorite dialogue in the episode, arguing over which kryptonite does what to Superman.
Guys, reality.
This is a favorite gag of mine, most commonly in science fiction.
Well, can you just beam up?
This is reality, friend.
Kralik suckers one of his late-night watchers into getting too close to him and escapes, turning one and butchering the other. His switch from raging monster to call him psychopath
Everything's okay now.
is completely unnerving. At the mansion, Buffy is confiding in Angel her fear of who she might be without her Slayer powers. Angel confesses to semi-stalking Buffy pre-Slayer calling and says he fell in love with her from the beginning because he could see her heart.
More than anything in my life, I wanted to keep it safe, to warm it with my own.
That's beautiful.
I think in some ways Angel is supposed to represent angsty teenage sad poetry, hot topic love, so I get it. A few hours later, Giles returns to the bed and breakfast and discovers the disemboweled other member of the Night Watchman. And while most of the carnage is off camera, whatever it was sickening enough to nauseate Giles. Giles. I love Christoph Beck's score in this bit as well. His soundtrack is a standout throughout the episode, but in this scene it plays particularly well. Buffy is sexually harassed by two older men on her way home, a curious parallel to the bit in the diner in Anne when Buffy had also lost her power, only by choice in that episode. She then gets attacked by Kralik and the henchmen, barely escaping with Giles, who takes her back to the school. There, he comes clean.
It's a test, Buffy. It's given to the Slayer if she reaches her 18th birthday.
That insanely subtle correction of phrase is so incredibly brutal and highlights the mostly unspoken, vile nature of the Slayer role in a way I really hadn't thought about since Prophecy Girl. Giles's confession comes out heavy in facts, but Buffy quickly puts a stop to that. Cordelia's timing is perfect as ever, cutting the tension at just the right moment. At Buffy's home, Kralik baits Joyce out of the house and steals her, leaving a note for Buffy to come find them both. She loads up on tools, heads to the bed and breakfast, and is trapped inside. Kralik has a wonderfully unnerving line he delivers to Joyce.
I won't kill her, I'll just make her like me. Different. She'll go to sleep. And when she wakes up, your face will be the first thing she eats.
There are a lot of references to Little Red Riding Hood, including Buffy's red jacket. According to Wikipedia, in early versions of Red Riding Hood, the wolf would often leave out Grandma's blood or meat for the girl to eat, who then unwittingly cannibalizes her own grandmother. That detail dovetails nicely into Kralik's horrifying line here. Quentin informs Giles that the test is still on, and Giles runs off after her.
Giles, we've no business. This is not business.
At the bed and breakfast, Buffy quickly subdues the lackey. Kralik taunts her from the shadows before pouncing, and from there, there's a nightmarish cat and mouse. Buffy manages to steal his pills and ends up in the basement with Joyce. Kralik breaks in, steals the pills back, and grabs a nearby glass of water, which Buffy has filled with holy water.
If I was at full Slayer power, I'd be punning right about now.
Buffy tries to free Joyce, but is attacked by the lackey, who is then staked by Giles, perhaps restoring a fraction of trust.
Congratulations, you passed.
Try not to sound too excited about it. So she passed. Giles, on the other hand, is released from the council for having a fatherly love for Buffy, which takes priority for him over his duties to the council. I think this is one of the most actually horrifying episodes of the show. While Buffy as a show plays with horror tropes in its high school setting, it very rarely achieves levels of tension and anxiety comparable to a good horror movie. At least not for me. But not so here. Still, this episode never really had a place in my heart before watching it for the guide. As ever, I love the father-daughter dynamics between Buffy and Giles and how they were affected here by Giles's betrayal and eventual atonement. But the problem is I couldn't sort out the stupid, dumb, why in the hell would they do that test. Those of you who aren't stateside might not know that the 18th birthday in the US is an incredibly significant one. You can vote, you can get a tattoo. Your 18th birthday signifies your independence. And what a terrifying prospect that must be for the Watchers Council, who consider the Slayer power to be their instrument. The reality of this rite of passage is it's intended to allow the council to maintain strict control over the Slayer power by keeping the bearer of it young. They don't care about the individual.
One Slayer dies, next one's called.
Strip the Slayer of all her power without warning and throw her in a cage with a wolf, under the guise of it being a rite of passage. What does it matter to the council? This isn't a test. It's a system of control.
It's been done this way for a dozen centuries.
Quentin's argument that this is how things have always been done has a very familiar conservative ring to it, and I think indirectly relates to the other side of the episode's coin, the male patriarchy that the council represents. Throughout the series, the council is shown to be predominantly male, the binary opposite of the all-female Slayer line. And in this episode, Buffy has unconscionable things done to her to remind her of her powerlessness, something which they attempt to tie to her gender.
I throw knives like
A girl?
I'm not the Slayer.
Instances of sexual harassment on the show tend to always awkwardly stand out from the narrative, and are usually in some way related to Buffy's power. In Phases, Larry grabs Buffy in gym class and is immediately tossed to the ground. In Anne, Buffy has deliberately given up her role as the Slayer and gets harassed at the coffee shop. And here, when her power is stolen from her, she gets accosted by two men on her walk home.
Hey, sweet girl. How much for a lap dance for me and my buddy?
directly and uncoincidentally before being attacked by two monsters. But physical power doesn't define a person's value or worth, as Buffy proves by beating the test at the end of the episode. It's easy to couch the subjugation of individuals in the dry and lifeless terminology of institutions. Tradition, right. Advanced cultures tend to try and promote equality through law, but discrimination that occurs beneath the veil of tradition often takes the longest to die out. The length of time something has been done the wrong way is never a good argument for continuing to do it, and the agency of any single individual should never be denied on the basis of preserving an institution.
Giles, we've no business. This is not business.
Giles' being fired from the council is to me symbolic of him no longer being a contributing member of the patriarchy. He disobeyed a direct order. He broke with tradition. Buffy's final words to Quentin are telling.
Bite me.
That phrasing suggests that the council now hold in her own life the same status to her as vampires, enemies, adversaries. And while they appear to have reconciled by the end of the episode, Giles' betrayal represents a sobering loss of innocence here for Buffy, tied to her actual father ditching her in the beginning of the episode, and positioning Buffy in a similar place as Faith when it comes to authority figures.
Hey, a word of advice. You're an idiot.
If the concept of overvaluing physical as special weren't completely debunked by the end of the episode, Xander takes us home.
Admit it, sometimes you just need a big, strong man.
It's a great episode, just not one I would personally choose to revisit very often, as funny enough, I'm not a huge horror fan, and this one is actually pretty tense. Kralik, as acted by Jeff Kober, is a terrific bad guy, played almost like a psychopathic Batman villain.
Oh, no, just a little lower, right? Oh, yes.
The first priority of any episode is always to tell a good story, and Helpless delivers. It is perhaps one of the scariest episodes of the show. Intense, significant, and heartbreaking.
Pills, 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 pills.
Nailed it.
All right, hold
Best
on.
one-off joke ever.
Let me switch to my headset.
Fill those pills with holy water and mini crosses.
There we go. And unshare my desktop. All right. Well, that's just your average light episode. So that one has one of the highest number of downvotes of any of the episode guides. And
of course.
Oh no!
It took me a second, but of course, yeah.
Yeah.
For YouTube, that's still a like.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not complaining about likes versus dislikes. The channel has one of the best ratios. We have a very kind community. It's just interesting the ones that draw ire, and the Buffy HD video has introduced a whole bunch of new people to the channel, and so there's a lot of people watching it from scratch right now, and I have been inundated with a wide variety of comments. Some of them good, some of them less so. But there was a gentleman today who said on the Hush video, you can't go one video without mentioning the non-existent patriarchy, can you?
Yeah, you kind of got the definition really wrong on this one.
Well, no, see now, what I was attempting to do in that opening, and Sarah, I think I specifically remember you leaving a comment on that video.
Did I?
Yeah. Now, this is in a strange that video is unique because it's actually one of my first forays into speaking very specifically and openly about the feminism of the show, and it's also. That was one of the first videos. I obviously spent a lot of time on the philosophy and all of that. But this time, I mean, this episode is just so specifically and so obviously about that I felt like it needed to be commented on. And so in that opening, you can tell I was like, okay, well, here we go, because this is going to be contentious for some people. For other people, it's, well, yeah. For some people, it's I'm speaking crazy talk. So my idea with defining the patriarchy in the way that I was to show the extremes of the definition, and the nonsense crazy definition that other people seem to think you mean when you're talking about patriarchy is the shadowy cabal. And in the episode there is literally a cabal of men keeping a woman down, and so my intention was not to say that that is what patriarchy is today. It's obviously much more complex than that, but maybe that was missed in that intro.
Yeah, I can see that's what you were trying to do, but I think it kind of, like, if we want to talk about what the patriarchy really is,
anything.
like what we're talking about
Do
is,
we want to?
Do we want to? Yes, that's.
well, I mean, we kind of have, if we're going to talk about it, don't we kind of have to define?
Yeah, I feel like exactly. I feel like that's one.
We
One of
totally
the.
can. It's just like beware of minefields, everyone.
I don't feel like the council is that different from Congress or other such cabals of men controlling women.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets very complicated when we break it out of the show into the real world.
Yeah.
But Sarah, what finish your thought if you could.
Okay, so my understanding of the definition of
It gets
patriarchy.
very complicated. When we
Boris,
break
we're
out
getting an
of the
echo
show
from
into
your
the
video
world.
stream if you can mute it.
Yeah, I can't hear anyone else right now for some reason. I'm not sure why.
All right. Well, I'm just gonna mute you then for a minute, while you figure it out.
Okay.
Okay, Sarah. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so essentially, it's more like it's a system of beliefs in the hierarchy of placing the masculine and men above the feminine and women. So it's not just about and like that's internal as well, which is why it sort of tends to put men at war with themselves, like we see happening to Giles in the episode, and also this idea of like keeping women in their place, put men at war with themselves.
Still getting an echo from me,
like
Boris.
we see happening to Giles.
I just muted you again.
That's weird. And like the people who preserve it don't do it out of like a shadowy cabal thing. Like very few people think that. It's more like people are afraid that without the hierarchy, the way things have always been done, there will be chaos. That's why the council is such a great metaphor for it, because Quentin himself talks in Checkpoint about like, if we don't do things this way, then there will be chaos.
Right.
And that's the
But
fear.
I don't think we should. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. And like when we talk about smashing it, it's not like we think it's like a thing. It's like chipping away at it, which has been going on for generations, but it is the work of generations.
But I also don't think we should ignore the fact that people who preserve it want that power. It's not just that there could be bad consequences to the world. I think that there's like selfish motivations behind Quentin's desire to maintain his
yeah.
There's a wonderful joke in Parks and Recreation where one of the characters is running for Congress and the Men's Rights League yells, "Men have had it really bad for at least the last little while, couple of months," which always made me smile. Well, let's again. I understand that it's a subject that brings up quite a bit for people, and so my intention in that opening, and that opening is something that I've referred back to people back to several times, is one, to indicate that I'm often wrong, and I'm up for that. I by that point had already changed certain theories in several occasions, and the other thing too is, like, from my perspective, it's something that required actually going out and reading about, because it's not something that I experienced specifically and personally. So, and sorry, I hope that I hope that by the end of that video, the perspective that you were describing was one that I had distilled through the conversations about institutions and tradition.
I think it's there. It's just I think it's important to define terms, and I think much as I love your work, and this mostly is a good video, I think that you're better at defining the terms now than you were.
Yeah, well, I mean, like we said, it was a first foray and an experiment when it came to those topics. Go ahead, Emily.
Because within the episode itself, the not the patriarchy, the council is portrayed as so like unambiguously evil.
Right.
That like I think the video it feels like the video didn't feel the need to push it out.
Well, there were a number of questions that episode raises. I mean, I did mention how manifestly evil the test was, and how that was actually a block for me before. But watching the episode, Jack and I, as we said, just watched the episode again, and again, I'm watching it thinking, it's so evil, it's crazy, right? Like,
they're lawful stupid.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's right.
The thing that people make fun of paladins for being is what the council actually is.
Yeah, it's a bit much. Can you, so here's my question: can anyone make an argument for justifying the text? So if we could, ditching our own morals, which to me is what I'm talking about. It feels like so essentially ethical to not do that. That it to me sort of breaks the realism of the episode itself. The episode is extremely well executed. It's horrifying. The music is wonderful. But that has always tripped me up, how evil that is, that it almost seems ridiculous.
Oh God, this is going to be like painful to actually.
You want me to start so you can gather some thoughts?
No. I have it. If at some point within the 12 centuries or whatever that Quentin points out, there was something happened and a decision was made to do this because there was doubt as to whether like wait, has everyone watched the whole series?
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nick,
Great.
where are you at?
Spoil away.
It's the thing I was saying right before. Right before the hangout, I finished the last episode.
Hey, what did you
talk about Angel Season 5?
We'll discuss that later.
Can't do that yet.
Oh yeah, he hasn't finished Angel Season 5, so.
But if this has nothing to do with Angel, it's fine.
Yeah.
But if at some point there was doubt as to whether the right potential was chosen, then like I guess an argument could be made as to like why they would do something like this. Because like if there was like legitimate doubt at one point, it's like this person is not cut out to be the Slayer. Why was this person chosen? And just like, I mean, yeah, okay, no matter what, it's gonna be a power grab. There's like no way around that. But for the council to feel like whatever powers are choosing the Slayer line have got it wrong, and things aren't going well. I mean, things are never going well. If we need a Slayer in the world, then things are never going well.
Things are always broke. There's a very specific line that Travers makes, but go ahead.
Then yeah, I could see like at one point in time someone saying maybe this is a good idea. And also like we don't know what the test was in previous years. It clearly like wasn't always what's his face.
Pills.
Yeah.
Do we think that the ending
was Pill's face? Because Giles even says that he like was a serial killer in, I don't know, not that like within the past 50 years, I think.
Yeah.
He was turned. So clearly, like, it couldn't have always been him. So who knows what the test looked like when it started?
Well, there's an interesting bit of lore in the comic books, which is that one of the things that drove Nikki away from the Watchers Council was the cruciamentum. Robin's mother took the cruciamentum test while pregnant, and ran off and quit working with the Watchers Council. I mean, but then
That's
again,
not possible because her Watcher raised her son.
there you go. Well,
Crowley.
yeah, unless the Cruciamentum drives both Watchers and Slayers away on a somewhat regular basis. Sierra, it sounded like you had something to say there. Did you want to?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because I think that the test is meant to kill Slayers that have gotten out of hand. I don't think there's any, because the other possibility that they survive and now you have a Slayer that dislikes the council and is angry seems very negative. So I feel like that possibility must not come up that much.
I mean, that was eventually the theory that I landed on that made the episode kind of work for me, is that it's as a system of control, they've shown Buffy that she can be gotten to. And that's the reason why it's a surprise test and not one that they warn her of in advance, or she dies and they summon a younger Slayer.
My only other theory is that it's meant to divide Slayers and Watchers that have gotten too close so that the Watchers Council can assert more control over the Slayer again, because either the Watcher passes and lies to her and they subvert that relationship, or the Watcher doesn't pass and gets fired.
And Wesley
And Wesley comes. Speaking of, Boris, do you have any thoughts on this one you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I have a few things to say. Okay, let's get this together. Speaking of Wesley, because this actually is a relevant bit, there was a point and there was a line that stood out in this rewatch. And this was when Giles was talking to Quentin, and he's like, I've actually been experiencing stuff. Like, I'm in the fray. I know what's going on. And like, because he's talking, like, he knows Buffy and all that stuff. And essentially, this is the setup for Wesley, because he is the guy that comes in and doesn't have the firsthand knowledge to really like understand things. And that's why he failed with Faith. Like, he didn't know anything. And then like he made the wrong call and it all went to hell. And then this whole thing ends up going full circle when we get to Sanctuary, because in that episode, he tells the council, or like those Watcher guys, where it's just like, I've had more experience, done more good working for Angel than I ever did for the council. And
that's interesting. Giles does call out his experience, and they immediately send a very inexperienced Watcher in the form of Wesley.
And it's telling that like Wesley was head boy. So this is the person which like, oh god, I'd love to rewatch the entire thing and see how many times he says that, because that would be hilarious. But so he is, when he was like, he's what they want. And like Giles must have like just barely passed.
Right, because he's so competent in comparison.
Yeah, but I think it's in a later video, or maybe I don't know, in some video that wasn't this one. You mentioned that like maybe, no, I think it's an earlier video. Maybe being the Watcher to the Slayer isn't actually like an accolade, especially.
I think it's Faith Home trick, because like.
Oh yeah, it must be. Because there's the thing about but because especially if you consider that like if the Cruciamentum is a test for both Slayer and Watcher, they are assigning the Watcher to the Slayer. The Watcher that gets assigned to the Slayer before the Cruciamentum is someone that has a high potential of being fired.
Interesting. Boris, did you have something else?
But although briefly, just to bounce on that one thing, it is kind of interesting that they even hired Giles, given all the crazy stuff he did in his past. Like, you think there would be like some background checks, but I guess like,
know?
But it's
like,
a
I have to
family.
imagine they do, because like,
I don't know.
but then again, like it's the Watchers. They're pretty dumb at times. So who really said?
Yeah, this entire season does quite a bit to undermine the Watchers as any sort of effective. I mean, from Gwendolyn Post and Giles' "I swear there was a memo" line to this, to Wesley himself.
When the mayor gives Faith a place to live. My favorite line in all of your videos is when the mayor gives Faith a place to live, and you compare it to like what she was doing before. You go, "The Watchers are stupid," and it's my favorite line out of any video ever because it's so true.
It's the first thing he does is put her in a nice place and treat her well. What a curious thing. Sorry, go ahead.
I think a lot of the stupidity and all of it comes back to this like slave to tradition thing, because they're all like the council. It's a thing you're like born into with family and everything, and they're just so married to tradition. I don't think it even occurs to anyone that they could, put Faith in a nice place or not do this.
Pay them.
Yeah, but it doesn't even occur to the Scoobies either. So I guess there's a whole lot of stupid.
They're teenagers.
Well, they also
Giles isn't.
Slayers.
Giles hasn't divorced himself from the traditional mindset of the Watchers.
Yeah, until this episode he starts to. Yeah,
it's also like the Watchers don't see the Slayers as people, just resources.
Yeah. Joyce, we can have a conversation with as to why she's like.
Does she know?
Well, she invites her for dinner, knows she's in the hotel, but doesn't think like you mentioned that in the amends video. Do you not?
I think I mentioned. I did a podcast with Lonnie recently, talking about amends, and I think I mentioned it in there.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
I had one more thought about why the active watcher is probably not a great position is because they get killed so often. So the council's not going to put their very powerful watchers there.
Yeah.
Well, also you got to deal with some like a lot of teenage girl stuff too, presumably. But,
or you're Giles, who just gets lucky and doesn't get killed when he gets hit in the head.
But also, like, there's evidence that Giles wasn't her first watcher.
Right,
because that guy from the movie
goes up in LA and is like, "Hey, he's the one like waiting in Sunnydale," which, like, okay, yeah, maybe they were planning for her to end up there, but she was at school. Like, the reason they moved to Sunnydale is because she gets kicked out of school.
It's
funny.
Kind of a weird coinkydink. Maybe someone set something up. I'm not really sure.
Apropos of nothing.
The first watcher was just that bad.
Yeah. Well,
the first watcher is dead. As like because it's based kind of in the movie continuity where it's like what's his name, Merrick or something, like Donald Sutherland, or in this case the other character actor, the guy from The Inner Light. So he would be dead, and then Buffy would move to Sunnydale.
Yeah, it's in the comics.
Yeah, and there's a canon version of the movie in comic book form. Russell, I wanted to give you a chance to speak. Do you have any thoughts on Helpless you want to throw out there? How's the episode land for you?
It was a plain episode. I wanted to know why they never used that wonder drug on, say, Faith or another Slayer that would come up later in Angel. It's just forgotten about, and that always bothered me. It bothered me that Giles would actually start this test knowing what it could do to Buffy, giving his relationship to her. But aside from that, it played out like a horror movie, like you said, Ian.
Well, that brings us to an interesting set of questions about the episode, and that is forgiving Giles. And how the question of that. I mean, he is sort of fired from the council and stands up to him at the end, but he was drugging her, hypnotizing her, and drugging her. It is such a violation. And I understand from sort of the pragmatic perspective, which is that the story must go on and the show needs to continue. But how do we all feel about the end of the episode and rolling into the next one?
I've hand canon to reason why.
Go ahead.
Who gave him the gem and what did they do before? They could have hypnotized him before.
Oh, you're talking about
because
Giles to it.
Yeah, because there's no way he would originally do that to Buffy, but we didn't see that gem ever before in his collection of stuff.
I totally believe it. It's up to it's a defining aspect of his character that he goes for this and then learns the error of his ways.
Plus, I think it would kind of take away from the episode of like he was like hypnotized because like he has to like willingly make the choice and then like realize that he messed up and like stuff. So
yeah, his is the rebellion of the episode. I mean, if from the standpoint of character development, specifically, this is Giles. Giles
Yeah.
is. It's hard to say it. It's hard to pluralize or possessive Giles.
Rupert's.
Rupert, thank you.
Rupert's.
Okay, so
Rippers.
I think.
Rippers.
Well, so obviously, if one was Buffy, Buffy is going to want to forgive Giles. It's like his position in her life as a father figure is so cemented at this point that like the irrational, very deep emotional part of you, like, is going to want to forgive him against all reason. So there's that. Also, but like if the episodes had continued, if like the next episode was a more standard episode, there would be like tension between the two of them and whatever. But because the next episode is the Zeppo, they've sort of cheated themselves out of that, out of the necessity of having to do that, because they're parodying themselves. So they don't have to, and they're not spending enough time with Buffy and Giles together that like that tension and that like awkward distrust would really be highlighted. And like there isn't space for that within the episode. So by the time whatever comes after the Zeppo, by the time we get past the Zeppo, it's which one?
Yeah, it's Bad Girls after the Zeppo.
Yeah.
By the time we get to Bad Girls, and then Bad Girls again, like we spend so much. They like the next couple, 2 or 3 episodes or whatever, spend enough time away from Buffy and Giles' relationship that it gives the viewers time to just sort of be like, yeah, okay. By the time, like,
well, I suppose
does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But I suppose from the standpoint of the season arc, Buffy needed this moment for Bad Girls to actually occur. So, I mean, I've spoken about how we all sort of humanize our parents at one time or another and see see their flaws and their mistakes. And so Faith had the moment with Gwendolyn Post.
You froze. Everything's frozen. Okay, you're back.
Okay. Faith had the moment with Gwendolyn Post. This moment is for Buffy to sort of drive them both away from authority figures. Bad Girls occurs, and the moral and ethical reaction to that moment is now their own. It's not something they're doing from the standpoint of parents or parental oversight or anything like that. It's on them to make that react to that independently, I suppose. But it's still a lot to be drugged by your father. Go ahead, Sarah.
I think the real moment of forgiveness, although there's the moment in the Zeppo where she's like, "Oh, you did this thing that we never saw," but I think the real moment is in Consequences, when Faith tells Giles that Buffy killed the guy, and
Deputy Mayor,
and he immediately knows.
Oh, he knows, yeah.
He knows that Buffy didn't do it, and when Buffy goes to him and has like. She's just like that, and the relief when he like clearly knows.
It's a wonderful.
No, it wasn't her.
I think that's the proof of his unflinching trust in her.
Yeah.
How would the episode have been different with Faith around?
Oh, Faith.
Well, I figured Boris, you'd be the one to answer that. Go ahead.
Well. Oh, wait, does anyone know what I'm talking about? Well, does this connect to another question? Where it's just like, why in the heck did Buffy go alone to get Joyce back? Because like Angel is still around and he could help, but like she's like, no, I'm just gonna go in alone because this is something I have to do. Even though like as I Will Remember You shows, if you go in without superpowers, you're gonna get your ass kicked.
It's because the script asked for it.
Yeah,
it is one of the conveniences of this particular script.
Angel was doing his hair,
and Faith goes on a walkabout.
You think that she wanted
my hair gel?
You can bring Cordy along. She would at least bring some snark.
Hang on one sec, boys. Sierra, what were you saying?
Do you think that she wanted to prove she could pass the test, even though she was angry?
Now that's another question I have about the episode. Very strangely, by the episode sort of Quentin Travers is it
Quentin Travers, yeah.
Quentin Travers gets to leave Sunnydale full of him. His test works. The test goes off. So evil or sort of ignorance, the ingrained discrimination or whatever we want to call him, has its day, and Buffy doesn't quit, which is another crazy thing to me about the episode. They tried to kill her and put her mother at serious risk, and she doesn't quit. So anyway, Sierra, I apologize. I got a little ranty there. What were you saying?
That was just my question. Do you think that she wanted to prove she could pass the test? Is that why she went in alone?
That makes. I mean, that might be the way that we headcanon this, is like she feels in some way still beholden to them, and that finally snaps in graduation day.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, she still feels sort of a necessity to toe the line. And does that undermine the theme of the episode? Anyone?
Well, kind of like Chosen, you could say that like this is just something that never really occurred to her to do, where it's like she never even really considered the possibility that you could leave the council people, period. And like it's not until Chosen where she's able to figure out, oh, we can make more Slayers. That would be great.
Activate all the Slayers, yeah.
Well, that too.
Yeah, Buffy always tries to do things on her own. That's who she is.
Yeah.
She's the solo, yeah. The one. I mean,
I just had a good image in my mind of Faith kicking the crap out of Travers if she was there.
You can sing it.
Having
That's about
just
the
watched
only thing we wouldn't have taken as a
I
win.
mean, in order to have Faith participate in the Cruciamentum, you have to get Faith to be hypnotized, and like so that you can drug her in the first place. And like the hypnotizing Faith that falls apart, like it's not gonna happen. She's not gonna show.
Faith is also 17, right?
Yeah, Faith's
Yep.
not going to stare at
true.
Crystal.
This does actually lead to another question I had.
Okay.
Which is Faith's character, because we all love her.
Yes.
Basically, I had a question where it's like, if Faith was in this test, how do you think she would react? Because and this connects to a point I realized watching the top 10 Buffy characters from the Council of Geeks video. And essentially it's that whereas Buffy was called, and it's a burden, it sucks, with Faith, it's kind of like this awesome thing because like her life was hell before she became the Slayer. Like it was crap. Like we don't know much, but prospects weren't good. Being the Slayer was like an awakening. It gave her like purpose. It let her kick ass and do whatever. So like if you take that away, like you could argue that things would actually be worse for her in some ways.
I could see.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
see two lines where either she does incredibly well or she dies incredibly quickly without her Slayer abilities.
Well, and she punches Giles
Oh.
in the nose. I feel like Giles leaves that one with a black eye.
Of course, I think she would succeed.
Well, I posit a different theory.
Go ahead.
I think as soon as Faith so thing about Buffy is Buffy still has a sense of duty. Being the Slayer, for her, it comes with, I have to do this, which is why she went to her death in Prophecy Girl. And, since then, it's like become even more solidified. Faith doesn't feel that. Faith has shown absolutely no proof of, I'm doing this because I need to, because it's like, she does it because it's fun.
Right. And I mean
And-
that's the setup. That's the setup for their
Like
what
Spike.
she represents
Right.
for Buffy this season.
So-
Absolutely.
If Faith, I think Faith at the first sign of weakness, at assuming that she got a case of the disease in that fight with the vampire and managed to not be killed with her own stake. I think she would go back to her hotel room and just lock herself in her hotel room.
Or bounce completely.
Out of a window.
Yeah.
Yeah, or bounce from Sunnydale completely.
So if they wanted to continue with the test, they would have to like break in and like forcefully subdue her and like take her to the house with Frolic in it.
Raven Silver Shadow says in chat, I can't picture Faith being hypnotized. She seems like she'd probably be resistant to hypnotism, if not immune to it.
Yeah.
Well, then again, she could be manipulated at certain points. So who really knows?
Well, I mean, we've already seen that with Gwendolyn Post.
Post needs to be put in the ground.
Well,
she's already in. Well, she disintegrated. That's good enough.
Yeah, she's a pile of ash.
Not slow enough.
Still okay.
Not slow enough.
Real quick, I just wanted to answer Sierra why Buffy went into that place alone. I always assumed it was just because her mom's in danger. She's not thinking clearly. I'm going to go save the person I love. Poof. That simple.
Yeah, but she's been terrorized.
Yeah.
Although she did get pushed over by a dude, so maybe like get some backup forces. Although speaking of that guy, should we talk about Cordy for a bit, because there's some good Cordy in this.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, like I really like the bit in this where like she's in the room or the library, and then like Buffy is like, Cordy, can you take me home? And Corey's like, yeah, of course. And although she does like have a comment about her report thing later, it's like the fact that she responds to that with like no snark or questions or complaining is just awesome. Like,
it's a beautiful little moment. Her compassion and empathy for Buffy in that moment.
Temporary compassion.
Temporary, but she also had, especially on the heels of the wish.
Yep.
But Cordy is always very understands the priorities. You know, when she can be spiteful and snarky, she is. But she knows she understands the stakes of what's going on. Go ahead, Boris.
Oh, I was making a point. It's fine.
Yeah, to me, she's always understood the no pun intended, the stakes of what's going on, and so. But you're right. I like her eventual path back into the Scooby Gang might begin with this episode. So the moment in amends of sort of violating Xander's intimate trust by throwing out in front of everybody his drunken Christmas fight story, maybe the beginning of sort of them fixing things. Oh, I forgot the Zeppo's next. Never mind. Forget everything that I just said.
It shows she's not cut off completely.
She's not cut off completely, and she's always been pragmatic about her alpha-ness. There's the line in Infinity War is you can't be a neighborhood Spider-Man when there's no neighborhood. You can't be the alpha of Sunny Sweatydale if there's no Sweatydale to be the alpha of.
Also, you mentioned priorities. Can I just mention Cordy as a queen in another dimension?
Oh yeah,
priorities. Please.
Really, she's a queen in all dimensions. Let's be honest.
Like literally. Wait, sorry. Going back to the Buffy going in alone thing, I just wanted to mention that I do think that when Buffy is feels like her power is being questioned, that she does feel like she needs to prove herself on her own. Like I think it comes up in Showtime in season 7, and with the big axe when she's seen that Caleb can defeat her, but she still goes in. I think that when she feels like her power's at its most questioned, she always goes in alone.
Well, I suppose just thematically, the scene between her and Angel kind of justifies her going into the building. When she's having a conversation with Angel, she says, before I was the Slayer, who am I without the power? Who am I without these things? Right. And so she is sort of, by going in there, she's attempting to answer that question for herself. It's just that theme kind of trips over how gross the test itself is and sort of validates the use of the cruciamentum. It's like the metaphor is stepping on the literal lore itself. But I mean, that's
back to what you
another
said
reading
earlier.
of it. Go ahead.
Oh, just that what you said earlier of, or someone said earlier of like, oh, all of Buffy is leading up to choices when she finally realizes she doesn't have to play by the rules and be the only one. But for the rest of the 7 seasons, she mistakenly does think that, even though it's bad and patriarchal, we could say.
Yeah. Well, and like we said, there needed to be a separation between her and Giles in order for her to actually be tempted by Faith's side of the Force, for lack of a better descriptor.
She
Well,
didn't have
plus-
faith.
Da-na-na-da-da-na-na.
So what is Krollick's dysfunction?
No, I don't. No one knows. It's a video game. We
Mental
can.
healthitis.
Go ahead, Sarah. What did you say?
It's like fictionalitis. It's the crazy thing that doesn't exist in reality. Convenient.
Fictionalitis.
I
I
mean,
love that.
he's taking a pill every hour or two.
Yeah,
for
he's
this head
birthed from
explosion.
Jane Eyre.
It
Necrosis?
seems more frequent than that. It seems like every half an hour, 20 minutes.
And he's taking like, oh god, who knows what he's taking?
That's like
It looked
necrosis.
like they were prescription drugs too. Like they had
Oh, yeah.
pills and stuff. Where do you get those?
Narrativist. I'm trying to mix narrative and Prozac here, and that's
Well, if the cruciamentum is a puzzle, if they're actually attempting to put the Slayer in a situation where there is a way out of it, then it's possible that they infected him with something
Yeah.
and are gatekeeping the drug to do it. And that explains then you just get a vicious vampire and then you hamstring him. Go ahead, Nick.
It could be he very much just had an addiction, and they just kept feeding it. And he was as a vampire. That's very partially physical.
Yeah,
The way she killed him could have been the answer.
That's what I'm saying. Is it's so specific. I mean, it's a wonderful little trick that David Fury built into the episode for it to work. But I mean, one of the inevitabilities of what we do is question and overthink the lore to no end. That's how I've spent
That's
my
our
life.
job.
It's so at odds with the like when Giles tells her what's in the syringe, he tells her it's a combination of muscle like presumably very powerful muscle relaxants and adrenal suppressants.
Right.
Which is which is completely accurate. Like if you wanted, destabilize the Slayer, that's exactly what you would give her.
Yeah.
And then you just have pills. Like
Well, I'd probably do something to f up her head a little bit more than an adrenal suppressant, but
well, I mean the psychological effect it's going to have on her. You don't need to put that in the drug. It's going to have it's going to have a very jarring psychological effect on her no matter what.
Yeah,
Like any Slayer that reaches their 18th birthday, which is horrifying, is already like in it enough that by the time they get there,
they're dependent.
The psychological effect of not being the Slayer is going to be extreme.
It's a very nightmarish episode on multiple levels. Boris, were you going to say something?
Yeah. So basically, as people were in the Rabbit and you, Ian, were suggesting, like, it is very likely that the Watchers like put something or mess Kralik up so that he would need the pills, so that as possibly as part of this test, or maybe it's some other thing. Which does kind of bring in some Tri-Wizard tournament logic here, because like essentially this whole thing is a crazy test which will probably kill people, but there's like a very simple solution that could save things possibly.
Oh god, it's Giles Dumbledore.
No.
Maybe.
Although it's still stupid in Harry Potter how they just let this go because of some magical binding contract. It's like, did you not realize? Like, even the movie has more of an explanation for this than the book. Where
The magical world has no common sense.
That is true.
This has been proven.
Like, apparently, when you get magic in the world, people just lose common sense.
And the tournament, like the decision to bring it back. Like it's said in, I think, the books and the movie that it's like this. It's like we stopped doing this, and then
because they killed so many people.
Doing it.
The timing to bring it back was convenient too. But
I'm gonna apply the Harry Potter breaks. and then switch back into Buffy gear.
Okay, we'll bounce back into Kralik for a second because
All right, go ahead, Boris.
we're talking about. Jack actually brought this up in the Rabbit Watch, and that's the idea that Kralik could have honestly been like a multi-episode villain character.
Yeah,
Like,
that would have been great.
yeah, like he could have been like not like a full big bad, but like
A mini bad.
yeah, like a Spike or an Mr. Trick. It would have been pretty cool.
Or a judge.
No, I
No,
think
Judge
that
was
would've-
kind of one-offy. So
that
Go
would
ahead,
have
Sarah.
Weeping Angeled him. That like overuse and the thing where you overuse it and it just loses all
Yeah.
thing. I think that would have Weeping Angeled.
maybe.
He could have.
I think he's best concentrated.
I'd say the Gentlemen are probably the closest to the Weeping Angels because they feel very Stephen Moffat-y. They're very like they have a very strong gimmick.
No, what I mean by Weeping Angels is like how it's totally awesome the first time. It's just amazing. And every time they bring it back, it's less and less and less and less. If you'd done that with the Gentleman or Kralik, it totally would have done that. It would have been.
They did a version of that, and we haven't mentioned this yet, of course, which is bringing Cobra back as a recurring character in season 6. Now, Cobra is
Rack. No,
yeah, Cobra is Rack, the
Theater.
magical drug dealer in season 6.
By the way, I based that opinion purely on the fact that Jeff Kober is just amazing. and
Yeah,
I
he's
think
great.
He's criminally underrated. Criminally underrated.
Rack is like Rack is like one of the characters that freaks me out the most.
Yeah,
Definitely
he's
in,
so
like,
gross.
probably
He's
in
so
top like, characters that freak me out.
Yeah, I agree.
Rack and that guy who kills Dawn.
Yeah, it's
Those are my
totally
two
worth
favorite
listening.
characters.
Joel Gray's character, yeah.
Oh no, Joel Gray. Oh no, Doc.
Now we've pushed a little bit into our time for the Zeppo, which I was planning on doing anyway. So I just want to go around and make sure anyone doesn't have any other thoughts they want to throw out. Nick, go ahead.
Slaypire.
Now I had that in a note, and I was going to skip that. We've never
been
seen
talking about that.
Yeah, would a vampire slayer that has to exist in the comics someplace? Would a vampire slayer be the worst vampire in the history of all vampires?
I've said many times that I think that, like, I wish the show explored that somehow. But
Got it.
We got close in season 4.
Yeah, at one point Sunday was gonna be a Slayer, former Slayer.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Season
4 premiere that Sunday.
I hated Sunday so much.
The headcanon that I immediately go to is how when Spike kills the Asian Slayer, he talks about what an aphrodisiac Slayer blood is, and when the Master tastes Buffy's blood in Prophecy Girl, he has sort of a drunken, overwhelming reaction, and so maybe the power of Slayer blood is such that, greedy, selfish vampires don't want to turn a Slayer. Although Kralik talks about in this episode, I'm going to make her like me.
Isn't part of the process of draining a vampire almost draining them completely?
Almost completely, yeah.
And then, so that their veins are empty and can be replenished with vampire blood. There's a certain sort of science there. Pretend.
There's magic involved.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I think it would be more interesting if it was actually the reverse of what we expect. If it weakened the vampire.
If they were the wimpiest vampire.
The spirit of the Slayer.
I come back to the theory that Drew is actually a potential. Or was a potential.
I've heard that. I love that.
I never heard that. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
And the way and that's why she has the visions. And like maybe the way the fact that her, like the vampire that she sired, Spike, is, although he's a powerful, cool vampire, the vampire doesn't erase his whole soul or his whole self the way it does with other vampires. I kind of wonder if the Slayerness weakened if it didn't weaken like her
that's
as
really
a
interesting.
vampire, him as a vampire.
Oh,
yeah. Plus you have the idea of spirit of the Slayer, vampire demon in someone's head.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
that's sort
like
of,
that.
that's sort of more the soul residue take again, and how she would be less effective as a vampire. We have, I know we have lots of fan fiction people in
We
the
broke
community.
Emily.
My son is blown a little bit.
Sierra or Russell, was there anything we missed for you? Anything you want to throw out?
I'm good.
All
Good
right.
as well.
Just the oh wait, is anyone else want to say anything?
Go ahead, Boris.
Yeah, just one last thing I wanted to add because in
Sure.
my note here is this is kind of like kind of starting becoming part one, but this is kind of where we start with Hank Summers like just being full douche.
Yeah, the worst. I have that in my notes. Hank Summers is the worst.
Yeah, because like in like the season 1 and like the season 2 premiere, he's not that bad. It's like he's okay, but like they kind of go to the extreme here, and like I guess things could have changed for him, but it does feel like part of it was just to kind of like get him out of the way because we can't have like positive like or even mixed bag role model or people.
I mean,
Well, we can't.
with his secretary in season 5.
Just from the writing perspective, I feel like they can't have two father figures. Giles is her father figure character, and so sort of thematically, if you have those two stepping on each other's toes, it's cleaner to not have him there.
I liked the episode with Hank, but they could have just killed him off if they're going to start doing that to kind of like preserve.
I've never
his
forgiven
image.
Hank for Nightmares, and he wasn't even real Hank in that. But I will never forgive him for Nightmares.
I don't think it's unrealistic. Can I just make one last comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that we're supposed to believe that he has a midlife crisis, and after he's had some time away from having any responsibilities as a father and husband, he realizes that he can like reconnect to being his teenage self, and doesn't really ever want to go back to having responsibilities. So he regresses, and I'd like to say that never happens in real life, but it does.
Well, in When She Was Bad, which is, I think, the last appearance of Hank.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess it is technically, but although he technically
he's normal again.
It's a hallucination though; it doesn't count.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
Becoming One flashback. That's his last, like, kind of in the moment appearance.
But in that scene, he appears to be having which, speaking of midlife crisis, he talks about how he and Buffy could not connect, and he compensated by buying her a bunch of stuff, and then goes to Mallorca with his secretary. So it does sort of track that he doesn't know how to live his life, or he doesn't know how to have the relationship with his daughters, and does have that breakdown and sort of leaves. But it is interesting how he just sort of, I do feel like it's convenience the way in which he gets written off the show itself.
Although you did say daughters, and that does kind of bring up the other theory.
I did say daughters.
This does bring up the theory that maybe Dawn's presence made things worse, as it often does.
We don't need to go there. I don't feel like the Dawn defense.
Wait until Dawn appears.
That's the appropriate time.
Yeah.
Wait until Dawn appears.
Yeah, just
Okay,
like
we'll say
having to argue about Riley when that comes up.
I do have one more thing on Helpless.
Go ahead.
So about the costumes, because I'm me. There's really interesting stuff with the use of with Giles' suits.
Interesting.
In that, I think suits represent his watcherness, or his like allegiance to the council. Is my theory. Because they start out not quite like they've stopped fitting as well as they did in season 1. And through this episode, we see his sort of like become less like his tie comes undone, and like his it's just like he seems to be progressively coming out of it. And at the end, he's taken his jacket and his vest off, and also the fact that he has a bit of red and the red suspenders as well, which while Quentin is like all in earth
Completely
tones,
buttoned up. Yeah.
yeah. And also Quentin's jacket is like, it's seriously from the 20s style. The jacket he's wearing, he's like, it's that old fashioned. And from here on, we see less of Giles in the full suit. Like he's so often in like just the vest or just suspenders, whereas Wesley is like tailored off Savile Row.
We
He
love
looks like a Wall Street fool.
He honestly looks older in that Buffy season 3 than he does throughout a good chunk of Angel. Honestly, it's weird.
And less
Oh
sexy.
yeah.
Well, that's a yeah. Well, once you know Wesley, you can go back and kind of appreciate the sexiness that there was. Like when he actually when he takes off his glasses in Graduation Day Part 2, it's like he has that look. It's like, oh, I kind
Yeah, but that's followed by that
yeah, but that's kind of his own.
The moment of most hardcore cringe in the entire show, right when he takes his glasses off, where I cringe so hard I might break a bone.
I don't
During
actually
that
know what
kiss.
moment you're talking about.
The cringe more for me
The
was
kiss.
probably when
Oh, the kiss, duh.
Let me put the brakes on. Let's go ahead and switch over to the Zeppo. I want to make sure that we don't
can
go
talk
over
about Helpless for another 5 hours. What are you talking about?
I am. If everyone can mute themselves, I'm gonna do the old switcheroo, and we'll get rolling on the other one. So hang on just one sec. Of course, I lost the browser window with there it is. All right.
That could easily collapse under the weight of it. Buffy is a show that could easily collapse under the weight of its own dire themes and apocalyptic melodrama. One of the things that constantly keeps the dramatic methane from overfilling the balloon of an episode is the show's humor and self-awareness. I'd mentioned previously that Xander is the most razor-witted and sharp character on the show. In the Zeppo, the Xander element is distilled from the episode, skimmed off the top, and the show is separated into component parts. The result is a hilarious escapade of nearly solo Xander. But far from being a simple comedic romp, there are very important questions at the Zeppo's core. Questions about masculinity, about bravery, and heart. The gang is facing off against a horde of evil Smurfettes, indicating the possibility of a greater danger following after. Faith and Buffy do Slayer things, and Giles aids with his considerable experience before getting tossed aside. Willow intervenes with a clouding spell, and the Slayers kill the last of them. The group discusses what this new evil might be an indication of, and Giles curses having to put Willow and Xander at... Wait a minute, where's Xander?
I'm good. We're fine. Just a little bit dirty.
The next day, Xander, equally adept at sports, drops a football into a school bully's lunch. The bully, named Jack O'Toole, threatens to cut Xander's face off and then eventually lets him go, shamed and dominated. Cordelia, witness to the whole thing, slices into Xander expertly. We see the shaming power of the ex that had all our secrets as Cordelia completely nails Xander with his own Superman reference that he made earlier.
You must feel like Jimmy Olsen.
But gee, Mr. White, if Clark and Lois get all the good stories, I'll never be a good reporter.
You're the Zeppo. Look it up.
Alrighty, the Marx Brothers were an American vaudeville and movie comedy act in the early 1900s. Most commonly, people remember the trio, Groucho, Chico, and Harpo. But there were actually 5 Marx Brothers that included Gummo and Zeppo. Zeppo Marx was always cast as the straight man in Marx Brothers bits, the one who doesn't get any of the jokes, the one who was patently unextraordinary. It's tempting to feel bad for Xander here. Nicholas Brendan's great performance begs us to, but there's always...
You know, hey, I don't know what everyone's talking about. That outfit doesn't make you look like a hooker.
What am I, mass transportation?
That's what a lot of the guys say, but it's just locker room talk. I wouldn't pay any mind.
Of course, 2 wrongs might not make a right, but as Cordelia says...
There was no part of that wasn't fun.
In the library, with Oz safely caged up for his monthly, Buffy and Giles are discussing the implications of monsters they slaughtered earlier, and Giles has realized they are in the midst of an apparent incoming apocalypse.
They intend to open the Hellmouth.
I love this. At this point in the episode, I hadn't quite realized what was going on here, so I was taking this entire scene quite literally. And in literal terms, the scene feels fatiguing and a retread. I mean, we've had, what, 1, 2, 3 apocalypses now? It hadn't quite dawned on me yet what the writers were doing. Xander decides that if Oz has being a werewolf, the Slayers have slaying, Willow has magic, and Giles has, let's be honest here, Giles has Ripper, then he needs a thing too.
Just need to find my thing.
To that end, he goes and borrows his uncle's car.
You girls need a lift?
Is this a penis metaphor?
Buffy shares with Xander regarding the incoming danger, and he asks how he can help out.
Take 2 glazed, 2 cinnamon, couple cream filled, and a jelly.
Cordelia, in the right place at the right time again, catches Xander on his donut run for the gang's research night and uses the opportunity to cut into him. But Xander is bailed out by a female car nut interested in his new proxy penis, which he knows absolutely nothing about. At the Bronze, while having a drink and listening to her car talk that he can't fake being interested in, Angel bursts in looking for Buffy.
You know.
Angel! Buddy! Friend buddy.
Angel runs off after Buffy, and Xander accidentally drives his car into Jack O'Toole. Xander cops to driving without insurance, and Jack pulls out a Bowie knife, threatening Xander in front of his car girl date.
You're a woman looking on, you can't stand up to me. You know what the difference between you and me is? Fear. Who has the least fear?
The cops show up, and Xander chooses not to get O'Toole in trouble. Xander's refusal to narc makes Jack change his entire perspective on Xander. O'Toole adopts him and asks him to drive them all to go and get his boys. It just happens that the boys are dead bodies in the cemetery, who O'Toole brings back to life through a touch of black magic.
Buddy.
At the library, the rest of the gang sends Xander are discussing in dire terms the coming dark fate of the world.
I have to try. All we know is that the fate of the entire world rests on it. You eat all the jellies?
Giles suggests Xander make another donut run for the team, and Buffy insists that after nearly injuring himself before, he needs to sit this one out. Giles proceeds to the cemetery to talk to the spirits, who reject his request for help. He runs into Xander, who tries to get Giles to take him with. Giles refuses, saying there is far too much danger.
Man, there's something in the air. Stench of death.
Yeah, I think it's a bomb.
Right about here was when I started to realize how the show was self-satirizing itself. Oz's cliche howl was like a trumpet announcing its intention. As if on cue, in the next scene, Buffy stands over the beaten body of Willie the Snitch, who explains the apocalypse is here tonight. The boys, with Xander, decide they want to bake a cake, which is apparently degenerate speak for build a bomb. At the hardware store, Xander tries to leave, and the boys say they can initiate him into the group.
What do I gotta do?
Xander runs and stumbles on Faith, out fighting another evil Smurfette on her own. He drives Faith back to her hotel, where Faith is feeling some pent-up frustration from not being able to kill the Smurf. She jumps him and then tosses him out of her hotel.
That was great. I got a shower.
Xander returns to his car and realizes the boys are planning to build a bomb. He goes and finds Buffy and Angel, who are knee-deep in some choice Angel speak.
I can't watch you die again.
As Xander interrupts, the dramatic music holds for a moment. He realizes his problem probably isn't as big as the problem his friends are facing, then leaves and the dramatic music begins again. So much fun. Xander decides his best course of action is to figure out where the boys wanted to put the bomb. He manages to get the information from one of the degenerate undead and proceeds to the school where the rest of the gang are in the midst of fighting the real apocalypse. Xander finds the bomb in the boiler room, keeping the show's penchant for making basements the site of significant metaphorical or subconscious activity.
Who knows what's going to come up from beneath us?
And Xander has the final showdown with Jack O'Toole. He doesn't know how to stop the bomb, but O'Toole does, so he traps O'Toole in the boiler room with him, willing to sacrifice his own life to save his friends. Jack defuses the bomb, and Xander tells him never to come back again. The next day, the rest of the gang, battered and bruised, commiserate over a struggle to save the world that demanded the very heights of unrestrained bravery and self-sacrifice. Or so we're told. Xander goes and gets snacks for everyone, running into Cordelia one more time, whose barbs, this time, fail to sink in. Of all the characters on the show, Xander gets some pretty fantastic one-offs. Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered might be the most charming episode in all of Season 2, weird magical roofie vibe aside. And the Zeppo capitalizes on everything that made Bewitched great, but plays with perspective and lore in such a fun and joyful way. The episode was written by Dan Weber, who only wrote one other episode, the nearly equally fantastic Lover's Walk.
Love isn't brains, children. It's blood. Blood screaming inside you to work its will.
Before he went on to become a writer on Futurama. It's a shame. Such an exceptional episode. And there's something extra cool about these particular kinds of episodes in Buffy. Very rarely does the show completely divert from its own format, but when it does, it figures out a way to ground that diversion in either its own lore or its characters. In a lot of other shows where you have a musical episode or an alternate timeline episode, there isn't an internal reason for that storyline to actually occur. People just sing for one single inexplicable episode and then everything goes back to normal the next. But stylistic departures in Buffy are always justified in some fashion and fit neatly within the season arc. Here, we the audience witness things like the hyperbolic melodrama between Angel and Buffy and the indifference to yet another apocalypse because we're watching the episode through Xander's eyes. The story is told completely from his point of view. This is how Xander sees the world. And Xander is, by his nature, conflicted. He's a boy who desires strongly to check the tick boxes of conventional masculinity.
Oh, Larry was about to pummel me.
Forget about it.
Oh, I'll forget about it. Maybe 15, 20 years when my rep for being a sissy man finally fades.
Xander, don't
A
you
black guy heals, Buffy, but cowardice has an unlimited shelf life.
And yet, his two best friends are girls. He shows no sign of relating well to any other male, quite the opposite, actually. With the exception of Giles, he lacks any positive male role model.
Uncle Rory, stack of DUIs, let me rent this bad boy till he's mobile again.
And in the Zeppo, we see Xander grasping for the conventional male identity, and doing so in all the wrong ways. The Zeppo is an interesting pairing with Helpless in its examination of gender. In Helpless, Buffy's physical strength was taken from her, making her vulnerable, something the male overseers in the episode suggested was a natural product of her gender.
I throw knives like...
A girl?
In the Zeppo, common gender stereotypes are completely inverted from the very opening. Faith and Buffy are the two warriors, slaying the power sisterhood Smurfettes. Xander is the weak and helpless one of the group, which generates in him massive insecurity. From there, we get a magic carpet ride tour of Xander's quest, from his proxy penis to joining O'Toole's gang. O'Toole exudes all the loathsome characteristics of conventional masculinity. He is always trying to be dominant, aggressive, and mean. And the magic carpet ride eventually leads to my favorite scene in the episode, where Faith deflowers Xander. Again, all conventions here are turned on their head. Faith is the sexually aggressive one, concerned mostly with her own pleasure instead of Xander's, riding him to her own satisfaction and then kicking him out when it's over. In her book, Why Buffy Matters, Rhonda Wilcox points out the very artful nature of this shot. Xander has always been in love with Buffy, and here is a shot of him mirrored off the television screen of him having sex with Faith, who is a version of Buffy in some way we're not really clear about yet at this point in the season. Simultaneously, the image represents the entire episode, a normal episode of the show, reversed and flipped on its head. If Helpless was asking us to question our preconceived notions about femininity, power, and equality, the Zeppo asked the same of us regarding masculinity. In the world of Buffy, where women kick ass and are the frontline warriors, Xander accepts it. He doesn't try to change or deny it or walk away from it. He embraces it. In the end, he finds a firmer grasp of his own identity, one that doesn't require any witnesses other than himself. Love him or hate him, Xander is a very important component to the show's discussion of gender. As producer and director of the original Buffy movie, Fran Kazuki said in an interview, "You can educate your daughters to be slayers, but you also have to educate your sons to be Xanders." And the Zeppo is the type of episode that makes Buffy Buffy. It's a show that can look at its own developed cliches, point at them, and laugh, as if to say to us, you thought that was the point? During the final standoff, Xander appears to defeat O'Toole on his terms.
So I guess the question really is, who has less fear?
But really, what has changed from the opening confrontation to now? Why was Xander able to face down O'Toole and his own possible demise so comfortably in the end? I've always felt that the notion of fearlessness, or people who feel fear being perceived as cowardly, was an idiotic one. Fear is an essential survival mechanism. It's a valuable tool that tells us not to poke the bear or to run when the lions start chasing. Total absence of fear isn't courage, it's stupidity. To quote author Meg Cabot, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important. And here, in the quiet of the high school basement, Xander puts everything on the line to save his friends. What else would we expect from Buffy's metaphorical heart?
So, two mistakes right off the bat. Quoting Fran Kazooie. And anytime you get one version of a comment, you can rest assured that the person who made that video is getting that 10 times. And the one that people take issue with in that particular video is Fran's quote saying, "We should also educate our sons to be Xanders."
Oh no!
One variety of that response is, yes, we should all create our sons to be, gaslighting nice guys, yada yada yada. Which doesn't really take into account that things age, and there was an intention that I think they were going for with the characters at the time. But anyway, Sarah, what did you think of what do you tell me about the Zeppo?
Oh, I love the Zeppo. And I think it's fair. They thought Xander was good at the time, and it's good that we've progressed. There's good things about Xander.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally love the Zeppo, and one thing that's really interesting to me that I noticed today watching it was how there's a thing about talking. Like throughout, he's like, first he asks Oz if the cool thing comes from, like the way that he talks non-committally, and then progressively he tells himself, "I need to talk less." like when
That's
the
interesting,
head
yeah.
the head comes off, and like the various things where talking too much, like just and then like I love that for Xander, who's always like so much of his jokes and stuff seems to come from like the need to fill the silence, and then his most heroic moment is when he can just shut the fuck up.
Yeah, there's
Just be silent.
I didn't pick up on that, but you're right. He talks about he describes one of the aspects of Oz's confident masculinity is his stoicism. And in the end of the episode, he says, "I like the quiet," and doesn't respond to Cordelia, but just smiles and walks away from her. Now, granted, he's Xander, so we're sort of back to normal Xander in the coming episodes, but that does follow that arc pretty well.
Yeah.
I guess
Go ahead, Boris.
Yeah, the reasoning for Xander, like, it kind of ties into the quote from Chosen, where it's like, sometimes I shouldn't just say words.
That's yeah, for some of us, that's a tough lesson.
Actions do speak louder.
Party in my eye socket, and everyone's invited. I love that line. I love it.
I don't know why that line does make me laugh every time I hear it.
It's so gross.
Great.
I think it's the word socket that makes it doesn't quite land for me. Russell, tell me a little bit about the Zeppo. Thoughts you have about this one?
Well, the ending of Zeppo, I still felt like Angel did in that one episode where he clocks him and says that guy really bugs me. I don't think this is Xander's shining moment. To me, Xander's shining moment was in Nightmares. He faced his fear. Here, this was just Xander facing a bully. And Xander's done a lot throughout the series that made me just dislike his character. He's not a bad guy. He's never fallen on the good and evil side. He's never killed anybody. I mean, he is good at heart, but it's his selfish nature that just always bugged me. And the fact that nobody has ever confronted him on it. And for a while, from season 4 to 6, he actually mellows out quite a bit. But then at the end of season 6 and 7, we get a taste of that selfish Xander again. And
he does have the end of the woods moment. That guy just bugs you. For Jack, I see a particular look on your face.
You already know what I'm gonna say, so let's just. Fine.
I think we can not very much say that Xander is, and we're talking about in a show that in a universe that has Connor and Dawn. I think without a doubt, Xander is the most contentious character for.
Definitely.
What about Spike?
In every Buffyverse conversation I've ever had, Xander is the most contentious character. And that's in a universe of contentious characters, as you point out with Spike and Dawn and so forth. Quinn Sinclair says in chat, can you define how Xander was supposed to be seen that we'd want people to be emulating him, which is in reference to the Kazooie mention that I made earlier. And part of that, what that is about, is power. Is Xander does not require the conventional gender power structures that especially in the early 90s or late 90s and early 2000s were a little bit more typical. He does not question why Buffy's power. He's the most underpowered member of the group, and later that becomes a commentary that people enjoy. But that is not relevant to him personally most of the time, as opposed to, say, Riley, who gets worried about Buffy's number, and he refuses. He risks his own life in order to keep his power, so he has some comparison to Buffy. So I mean, by looking at Riley versus Xander, I think you can see the healthy aspects of what Xander was supposed to represent.
He doesn't need to depower the women around him in order to feel like it doesn't even cross his mind in this.
Right.
I don't think it ever seems to cross his mind to depower the women in his life or even anyone else in order to gain power himself, which in stark contrast to, I mean, Riley doesn't explicitly do it, but he certainly needs to feel powerful in relation to somebody else.
Plus Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan in Superstar, which and then like the entire trio, like that's all Warren does. And
God, they're so awful.
And like so, and of course, like we just talked about the council. So it's, I think that's like a really crucial part of what it is.
Yeah, I think that's where they were going, or at least where Fran was going with that quote. And I felt like that was indicated in my script, but people have such vitriolic reactions to Xander's character that, of course, I'm not talking about any of those other things.
And like both Anya and Cordelia were like totally more, not more powerful than like he was not the alpha in either of those.
No, Cordy definitely had power.
Yeah,
or just
and
not.
Anya was just like, I'm gonna do what I want, and why don't you like me?
Nick, go ahead.
Well, it's like I think it was the last episode when I was talking about like Xander kind of doesn't want to be the more powerful person in with the people around him, especially in regards to like his family situation and all that, like the drunk Christmas fight type crap that got brought up. It's like he doesn't want to be the powerful person. He wants to be seen as masculine, which is what this episode addressed. He doesn't mind not being the most powerful person in the room.
Yeah.
Unlike a lot of other people in this show.
The show is offering up several different perspectives of what masculinity is. I mean, O'Toole is the ugly aspect of it that it sometimes gets branded with. Oz is a different part of that spectrum, and Xander kind of finds his own middle ground in the story. But I mean, if you're sculpting a feminist parable, you do have to grapple with the idea of what is healthy masculinity, and I think, and this is one of the earlier attempts to do so. It just, you also have it's in a show that has many female characters. They don't all necessarily speak for what being a woman is, but when you have one male character, he becomes a little one central male character, he becomes a little overly representative of what the show's philosophy of masculinity may be. And so I get why that is an issue at times for people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jack. I cut you off.
No, I'll just say that I staunchly defend Xander because I don't think he's a bad guy. And yes, he can be kind of douchey, but most of the time in those moments, he's joking. And the last thing is, I say this like every time Xander comes up on the stream, but his behavior makes sense for a 16, 17-year-old boy. It might not be good, but it makes sense. I don't think Xander is this horrible, disgusting person that a lot of people think he is. I just don't.
Well, I hope you show up for the Into the Woods discussion. Is all I'll say.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tough one. I'm gonna be.
There's gonna be a lot of tough ones.
I'm gonna I'm already on my own now as it is.
You're our unofficial Xander advocate, so you're coming to that one.
Yeah. I will defend him until my last breath.
Xander does say himself, like, I should stop talking more often.
Yeah.
I do not think he's unrealistic at all.
Sierra, go ahead.
I think that's why I dislike Xander though, and more than I dislike the big bad. It's like how I think the trio is the only big bads that really frighten me now when I'm watching it as an adult, because I see real trios in our world all the time.
They are nauseating, certainly.
Those people don't normally get magic powers.
Well, we hope. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that, like, yeah, the teenage boys I knew in high school were a lot like Xander, but that is not a good thing. So I think when we're rewatching Buffy, I don't think that I don't think that giving Xander a pass necessarily.
It does give him space to grow, certainly, when it comes to the story, and I think that he does. But there is always an interesting. There's an interesting phenomena in our community, and that is what we're willing to forgive. And I'm always curious how that ranges between characters. You've got people who will go to no end to say how much they despise one person in particular. But Spike is so charming and wonderful and whatever.
That's also dependent on if they ship those characters with anybody.
Down,
a lot more giving it.
A lot of
go ahead, Russell.
Oh, I was just going to say Spike and Angel,
I'd say like a lot of it has to do with context. Like certain characters, like if you bring a lot of character to something and they do some bad stuff, you might be willing to look past certain things. But also, the thing is, with people like Spike and Faith, they do like often try to make up for what they've done. Like Faith like did some horrible stuff, but we were all there watching that 5x5 scene. We're like, oh no. And the thing with Xander, and I guess we'll talk about him now. It's like I have some notable issues with the early season Xander.
Xander's what? He said a couple of mean things and he's a bit of a perv.
He was gonna kill Angel or set people up to kill Angel.
Okay. There's that.
He has flaws.
There's no consequences for that.
A couple of mean
Hang on, everyone. I know Xander winds us all up. I'll go left to right here. Sarah, what were you going to say?
I think it's understatement to say he says a couple of mean things. I mean, I love Xander, but in a critical, God, I know you're capable of doing better. Why are you acting like such a shit? And it's particularly like Emily said that he doesn't depower women, but he does with the women he's dating. This is the thing with Xander is he's supportive and great as a friend, but oh boy, is he not good as a boyfriend.
No.
Yet.
Yet.
Hopefully he, well, in the comics he does. There is some therapy. Finally.
Oh my god.
Some.
Somebody got the therapy finally.
But with the Spike thing, I mean, I think we love Spike because he's fictional. and so we can love him because it's safe with fiction, but Xander feels real, so we have like real feelings about him.
Yeah, one's a human boy and the other's a vampire. Emily, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. There's like a really big difference between, because you mentioned comparing him to like Spike, and it's mostly just Spike. Forgiveness. I think the point of view on Xander would, and I don't mean to come down on like forgiveness or like who should be forgiven or whatever with this statement or this whatever, but
Sure.
the only background, and faith, the only background we get in terms of the trauma that Xander's been through is implicit. The most explicit we get is the comment about his family's drunken fights. He makes a couple comments about his uncle Rory. We sort of get stuff with Hell's Bells, but it doesn't hold up to like how bad Xander's home life has been suggested to be in the past, and I just don't want to talk about Hell's Bells. And
Restless is
and Restless, and the moment Restless, and so whereas like we get a lot of backstory on Spike, and he's a vampire, so like there's a lot there to wrap, like there's a lot of excuses to wrap him in. We get similar situation with Fate. There are a lot of excuses to wrap her in when it comes to forgiving the character, and whether or not those excuses are valid or whatever, I'm not like, please comment whatever, don't attack me. I'm not coming down.
I mean that's the challenge. Go ahead.
Anyone, but because I do have my own opinions, but that's not what this statement is about. But with Xander, like, if you really think about it and like sort of extrapolate what his home life and the type of trauma that he's been through, and like how he probably views masculinity, and how like, and the husband-wife relationship he's probably spent his whole life around, then you can extrapolate like why all of these, like why he acts the way he acts, and you're suddenly provided with so many very legitimate and very logical reasons as to like why he treats both the women that he's in relationships with and the women that he's not in relationships with the way he does. But we're not given that information. We're just not.
Yeah.
So all we see is his behavior, and we don't get like all of the psychology and all of the whatever behind it, and that is, if we did, he might still be a very contentious character, but it would be so different. We would be able to look at him so differently.
Well, I mean, I tried to speak to what you're talking about in the Restless review, by talking about how, I mean, if we're drawing a distinction between just bad parenting, which it feels like every kid on the show has suffered in one form or another at one point, to abuse. Xander is the only one that I, other than Faith, that I think specifically is called out as being a child of abuse. And it was when we hit the scene in Restless that I sort of felt like, I have all of the empathy and compassion for both Anya and Xander in Hell's Bells. Certainly he is he's not the instigator. The demon is the instigator in that particular scene, but he triggers a piece of baggage for Xander that is highlighted in Restless, which is fear of turning into his abusive father, and showing that he's not ready. It just comes at the worst, most impossible, inconvenient time. So I don't know. Quinn says in chat, I think we're going. What we're willing to forgive is based not on the crime committed, but the way in which the person who did wrong tries to atone. I think that's ideal, but I don't think that is actually true in execution when it comes to the community. Simply by having been witness to people's willingness to tear down one character while embracing another one with sort of an equally problematic past. There is a wide variety of likes versus dislikes in our particular community.
Connor, for instance.
Boris, go ahead. I think I've cut you off twice.
Oh yeah. Connor, for instance, is a pretty
Sure.
big one. Like his past is probably the worst out of like so many of them. Like Kortov is a thing, and like
he grew up in a hell dimension.
Yeah, and it's like few people will give him a pass, but like yeah, so that's one of the big examples. I guess I was talking earlier about Xander, and like I guess my issue with him in a lot of cases is that like there's not always consequences for his actions, and like yeah, like the whole Angelus thing is like the biggest thing for me, because like he's basically just like kill him, whatever, and he's never really called out on it, and it's annoying. And like he like Revelations is like his peak douche, where it's like he gets Faith involved, and like couldn't like, and he's like, hey, like let's kill Angel, it'll be great.
Yeah, it's a lie of omission, certainly.
Can I just say, I also hate the lie in Becoming Part 2 as well.
Yeah, that's
kick his ass.
Yeah, I despise that as well, and I despise it more because it comes up very, very briefly in season 7, and then it's dismissed like
selfless.
that. Like instantly dismissed. Buffy should be angry.
So much.
That whole scene
I think
when
Buffy
that
is
comes up
angry.
just bugs me.
They just,
Like, wait,
No, they don't. I don't. It's not
hang
that
on.
she knows about it. She never finds out, because like what happens is that like they're talking, and Buffy has like, and you were there, right? You said to kick his ass, and Will is like, I never said that. But then Xander cuts her off, and then they never have that conversation.
Yeah.
They're a little busy, but still.
Well, Jack and I have had I've made a defense of that scene to no
We've
end.
been like at each other's throats about that almost.
Oh yeah.
Russell, I think I cut you off earlier. Was there anything you wanted to throw out that I missed?
Well, like I was saying, it wasn't just that scene that kicked his ass scene, but that whole scene when he's talking to Buffy, like you can't kill Anya, you don't know what it's like, you don't love her, and she's like, I loved Angel.
Yeah,
and
I killed
you
Angel.
egged me on. It's like he is still selfish here in season 7 when he discovers Spike having that little fling with Anya. He goes down to try to kill Spike, not because Spike's a vampire, not because Spike is evil, but because he thinks he has a claim on Anya. And again, he's driven by selfish desire, which there is no consequence for his behavior. He never gets out of it. Like I said, he mellowed out from the end of season 3 with buying Cordy that dress and being cordial towards the gang up until that part in season 6. And I'm like, that guy just bugs me.
Yeah,
and he's human.
There's something,
sorry.
because we're all referring to Xander as selfish, which he is.
Sure.
Like, so is Faith. The big thing about Xander, though, is that he's not just selfish, he's self-righteous. Which adds a whole other layer. He's never he never admits to being wrong. He's very exuberant is not the right word, but very open about how right he thinks he is, and like not willing to listen to anything else.
Well, strangely, I think that also might be a byproduct of who he is metaphorically. I mean, being the strength or the heart or what have you, speaking with confidence.
But that's not.
I get it. I understand.
There is strength in admitting weakness.
MJ pointed out in chat, Willow literally killed a human being. Willow flayed a guy.
Oh, but Xander's so bad. Sorry.
Yeah, but to be fair, Warren, like, he killed people. Like, let's be real. Like, and unlike Angel, they didn't know him earlier on. Like, they weren't buddies or anything. And like,
She didn't just kill him; she tortured him.
She flayed him alive.
She slowly pushed a bullet
Yeah,
through
but
his
she-
skull.
Well, at least she went to.
His skull. It wasn't his skull. It was his chest.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, his chest. Yeah.
Probably
At
worse.
least she went to At least she went to like England witch therapy for that for a while. It's not as bad
Oh
as-
wow, that makes it all better.
Well, Xander got nothing. Xander got nothing.
Dumbledore therapy.
This is the thing. It's not that Xander is worse than any other character. It's that
It
the
sounds
show
like he is, apparently.
completely- the show is completely blind to his faults, and so that's what's frustrating us. Is that the show is like, this guy is great, and we're all like, you're lying. This guy is deeply, deeply, deeply flawed.
I did not mean to turn this into the Xander hour, but we knew that it was inevitable. With
We watched the Zeppo, which is
exactly.
like, I don't understand. What did you think it was going to be?
I was noticing this. Russell, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
No, I'm good.
Okay. I was noticing there were strange thematic ties between Helpless and the Zeppo. I have that in the notes.
Mm-hmm.
Buffy's heart is bullied by the council. So yeah, I think I was reaching there.
Yeah, even like the ending of Helpless is, you could argue, is a setup for Zeppo in a way. So
Yeah.
there's-
Dan Veber's credited as the writer for this, but holy cow, does this feel like a Jane Espenson episode? And she is credited as the story editor. And given that Dan Veber didn't write another episode, I just feel like this one is really more Espenson than anything else.
Who can really say with these things
I bel-
sometimes?
Yeah.
I believe I've heard that Whedon rewrote a lot of this episode
Interesting.
because
I mean,
Weber
it's
was,
so
was, like,
funny.
really new to it,
Yeah.
so it got a lot of rewrites.
Reuse of the Prophecy Girl puppet was kind of interesting.
Prophecy Girl puppet?
Like the
Yeah.
big worm thingy that comes out of the mouth.
Yeah. Dan Veber. Oh, hi. Lonnie is in chat. Lonnie points out in chat, Dan Veber wrote Lover's Walk. Yes. Yes. I just thought it was interesting that Espenson is listed as the story editor. And boy, does this feel like Espenson's humor throughout.
And it was very edited then.
Yeah. Well, in fairness to Dan Veber, like Futurama is an awesome show. So there's a lot of awesome in this episode.
Yeah.
Like he could have a lot of it. The thing is with things like this and like the whole passion, like the Ty King passion thing, where everyone's like, "Hey, that guy wrote Some Assembly Required. He couldn't have wrote this awesome passion episode." It's like the thing is, a lot of times behind the scenes, we can't really know for sure like what went into certain things. Like Stephen S. DeKnight wrote Seeing Red, but we know Mari Noxon came up with that whole bathroom scene idea.
Well,
No,
and I-
Joss wrote it.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, Joss wrote it, and that he took an idea that she came up that we think it was her, spoke about as being from her life. So
Well, the other thing too, I was watching a behind the scenes about It's Always Sunny, and they said they literally write the script in the room together, talking, and then take turns whose name goes on what. So you never really know. And Espenson said that Joss had a hand in almost every script on the show. So, just one of those things. But we are at...
No, Seeing Red is listed as written by Stephen S. DeKnight and directed by Michael Gershman.
I thought it was Joss.
No, Joss didn't write that episode. The only episode he wrote in season 6 was Once More with Feeling.
Yeah.
Also, is
that episode?
Oh no, let's not get into that right now. Let's not get into that.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and wrap up there. Is there anything else anyone wants to throw out? Nick, go ahead.
An interesting parallel that I kind of saw was like Xander is he's very much the guy who's like some people like looking outside might wonder why he's around, but when the chips are down, he's there. And it's like the two because I remember this episode and my immediate thought was him against Dark Willow. Like,
well, that's interesting.
Honestly,
two moments where it's just him and one person.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
I'd honestly say like Honestly, I'd say this scene, the I like the quiet scene is better than the yellow crayon scene. Honestly.
Well, we don't need to start a debate there. Jack,
I'll season 6 talk.
We have 3 seasons.
Jack, do you need a hug?
No, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. Fine. I don't need any of you at all.
I don't need any of you.
I'm a strong, independent woman who don't need no man.
Sierra, we lost you there for a little bit. I wanted to give you a chance to speak if there's anything you wanted to say. You're on mute right now, just so you know.
Oh yeah, sorry, my internet went out, but I don't want to repeat any Xander comments that have already been made. So. I'll just say that I think that it's the slut shaming in the early seasons that really bug me, and I don't think that can be written off as a few mean comments, because I think it speaks to something deeper about the way he feels insecure around women. But I definitely think that that gets better, and Riley really takes up the mantle of being insecure around powerful women later on.
I'm looking over at chat, and there's people just throwing out examples of terrible things all the other characters have done on the show. It's a cavalcade of Buffy stabbed Faith and didn't turn herself in.
Sam is the worst.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end it there. Just quick channel news. I hope you guys have gotten a chance to watch Eternal Sunshine, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm working on why you should watch Firefly, and I'm probably going to do the live tweet session for Buffy versus Dracula tonight or tomorrow and start working on, that script.
Ian, have you read the original script for Eternal Sunshine?
Yeah,
I have not. Were you the one that left the comment about that on the channel?
Yeah, I read it for a class in college, and it's very depressing.
Yeah, well,
not depressing. I haven't seen it.
Sonic. There's as I was in the first edit stream for that video, I was editing Eternal Sunshine, and one of the subscribers immediately just said, "Okay, I'm going to go watch the movie," and had never seen it before, and was sort of grieving and processing Eternal Sunshine over the course of the next several edit streams. But he said
never seen it before.
He said he went and watched the deleted scenes, and there's even some sort of dark, heinous deleted scenes that paint Howard in an even more ugly light, and all of that. So yeah, it's interesting. There's I wish that I had saved the quote, but I have a particular attitude about deleted scenes, which is the quote said, I never have a great meal at a restaurant and then ask the waiter to bring out the eggshells they used to make it so I can suck on them, or something like that. The idea being, the product as intended was what we were meant to consume, and so I tend to avoid those. Even just hearing about some of the deleted scenes, I colored the movie in a way that I don't enjoy. I prefer to have that intended experience. But it's interesting how dark the script was originally.
I think that way about film and TV scripts, and this came up. You actually brought up the script in I think it was actually Lover's Walk, or the one right before Lover's Walk. In the different way about film and TV scripts. Like it. If we go back and say oh well, the script actually says this. There was something about one of the scenes in one of the early episodes when Xander and Willow were spiraling.
Right.
And it's okay, but that's very different than what they actually ended up with. So,
right? No, I think
it's not a play where the script goes through changes and whatever, and because it gets revivals and that sort of thing. It's you take the script, and sometimes the script gets is completely destroyed by the end product, which is sort of what happened with the Buffy movie. And so it's the kind of thing where okay, that might be what the script says, but ultimately the cinematographer, the director, the editor, they made a different decision.
Sierra, go ahead. It sounded like there was something you were going to say there.
Oh yeah, I only brought up the script not to say that that's canon, but to say that I think the changes they made are really interesting and speak to what they intended in the final edit.
Well, it's one thing I talked about in the review was how Joel and Clem are not particularly remarkable individuals. They're they're muted. Sorry about that. I muted myself. They're portrayed as very normal and straightforward, and I think that works.
You're muted again, Ian. You're muted.
Sorry about that. And we're back. I think that works towards the movie's credit when it comes to theme. It definitely made it more accessible. But one of the tricks is to show them as fallible without while still making them people that we're interested in watching. And
Accessible. But one of the
Boris, your audio is we're getting an echo. If you could mute yourself, buddy. Anyway, that sorry, I didn't mean to. I just got a little flustered.
and
Boris, I gotta mute you, buddy. I'm getting an echo in the video. But I'm gonna go ahead. Actually, let's just go ahead and wrap up there. I hope you enjoyed the review. The videos are gonna hopefully be coming back more regular in May. Especially now that we'll be back on the Buffy versus Dracula, Angel season 2, Firefly season 1 turn. But anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
What's next month?
Bye.
Bye, YouTube.
Don't we need to decide next month?
We do.
Bad Girls and Consequences.
It's Bad Girls and Consequences.
It's Bad Girls and Consequences.
Sounds good. Out the sound.
Hey,
That was easy.
Keep it under 2 hours.
All of us just managed to agree on something. Did we just become best friends?
I mean, maybe, kind of.
All right, I'll see you guys in a month.
Bye.
Bye.